Moscow, December 7, 1982.
A man steps out of a car in the freezing dark, wearing a disguise. His real clothes stuffed in a sack behind him in the back seat. His wife reaches forward and pulls a hidden lever. A fake birthday cake springs open, and a life-size dummy pops up where he was just sitting.
This is the CIA, and they're not running from the law.
They're running from the KGB.
The most ruthless intelligence service owners.
Somewhere in the city is the most valuable spy America has ever had.
And for 5 months, he has vanished without a trace.
Is he dead? Has he talked? Or is he waiting to hand over the secret that could end the Cold War? This is a true story of Adolf Tolkachev, the engineer the CIA secretly called the billion-dollar spy.
For the 30 years, the CIA could not crack Moscow. Every agent that tried to run inside the Soviet capital was eventually caught, exposed, or executed. The KGB owned these streets.
Then, in the middle of the freezing January night,
a stranger walked up to an American diplomat at a gas pump and changed the entire balance of the Cold War. Over 6 years,
this man would hand the United States the deepest secrets of Soviet military aviation.
Radar systems, fighter jets, blueprints.
Weapons years ahead of anything the West had seen. He met his CIA handlers 21 times on the streets of Moscow. He was never caught by the KGB. He was undone instead by one of his own protectors.
This is how and why.
To understand why Adolf Tolkachev did what he did,
you have to go back 40 years to a winter night in 1937, long before he ever picked up a camera for the CIA. Moscow at the height of Stalin's Great Terror.
A newspaper editor and his wife are living an ordinary life with their 2-year-old daughter.
The wife had made one mistake.
She had visited her own father, who lived abroad.
That alone was enough.
On a December night, the secret police came for her.
She was accused of belonging to a subversive organization.
She never saw her husband or her daughter again. She was executed within 3 months.
6 years later, they came for her husband too. He refused to denounce his dead wife.
For that, he was sent to a labor camp above the Arctic Circle for 10 years. Their daughter grew up parentless, shuffled between state orphanages. Her name was Natalia.
Years later, she would marry a quiet, methodical engineer named Adolf Tolkachev. She told him everything.
The arrests, the silence, the lie the whole country had been
forced to call normal, and Tolkachev a brilliant radar engineer who had spent his entire career designing weapons for the very state that
destroyed his wife's family. Never forget it. He once told his CIA handlers simply that he was a dissident at heart.
That single sentence was the whole motive. Not money, not ideology, memory, by day.
Tolkachev was one of the most trusted engineers in the Soviet military's most secretive radar institute, designing the very system meant to shoot down American bombers by night in a country where saying the wrong word to the wrong person could end your life. He carried a rage that had nowhere to go.
He was 50 years old. He had never set foot outside the Soviet Union. He knew almost nothing about America.
But he had decided alone, with no one's help and no one's permission, that he was going to become a spy.
There was only one problem. He had no idea how to reach the CIA.
The CIA, for very good reason, was terrified of him.
January 1977. The CIA station chief in Moscow is filling up his car at a gas station reserved for foreign diplomats. A stranger walks up.
"Are you American? I would like to talk to you." He slips a folded note into the car seat and disappears into the dark.
Inside the embassy, the station chief unfolds it. The man wants to talk in total secrecy with an appropriate American official. The CIA should be thrilled. Instead, they are afraid. For decades, the KGB has used exactly the kind of approach to lure CIA officers into traps, to expel them, humiliate them, or worse.
Headquarters orders the station chief to do nothing.
The man does not give up.
He comes back again and again, 4 times over 5 months. He approached the same officer on the street, handing him notes, knocking on his door, knocking on his car window, and 4 times the CIA turns him away.
Imagine the kind of persistence. Every attempt could get him arrested on the spot. Every attempt is rejected by the only people who could help him. And still, he keeps coming back.
Finally, in February 1978, more than a year after his first attempt, Washington relents. The Pentagon has just sent an urgent request for any intelligence on Soviet weapons control systems. The time is too good to ignore.
On a dark side street next to the US Embassy, the engineer finally makes contact.
He hands over a packet of paper inside 11 handwritten pages, revealing his full identity, his name, his job, his home address, and his lunch hour.
His name was Adolf Tolkachev. He worked at one of the Soviet Union's most secretive military radar institutes, and he had just handed the United States the keys. But trust between spy and his handlers isn't built in a single night. It is built meeting by meeting, each one a roll of the dice. Their first face-to-face conversation took place in brutal, sub-zero cold on New Year's Day, when KGB patrols had finally thinned out for the holiday.
His handler finally asked him the question everyone at the CIA wanted answered. "Why are you doing this?" Tolkachev posed. Then he said, "Only this, I'm a dissident at heart." Now came the real challenge.
How does a man memorize thousands of pages of top-secret blueprints without ever being caught copying a single one? The Soviet Union guarded its photocopiers like nuclear launch codes.
So the CIA engineers built him something almost unbelievable, a camera the size of a cigarette lighter with a lens built in one microscope piece of glass at a time.
It still wasn't enough.
The first batch of film came back almost entirely unreadable, blurred and useless.
800 photographs lost to a shaking hand and bad light.
Tolkachev needed a better way.
He found one locking himself in men's restroom stall at the end of every workday, propping a hidden camera on a narrow window ledge and photographing classified documents one page at a time, page by page, frame by frame.
An ordinary Soviet engineer was about to become the most productive spy the CIA had ever run.
But the more he gave them, the more there was to lose. Over the next several years, Tolkachev delivers an avalanche of material. The complete design of the radar guiding Soviet fighter jets, early blueprints for next-generation aircraft, even physical circuit boards smuggled out under his coat. The US Air Force is asked to estimate in dollars what all this intelligence is worth, how much it has saved America in research and development it no longer has to do from scratch. The number that comes back is almost $2 billion, and that's before they even look at the last 179 rolls of film.
They gave him a new nickname. They started calling him the billion-dollar spy.
Every page he hands over is a page that could get him killed.
In 1983, a phone call inside his own institute nearly ends everything.
His supervisor is asked, out of nowhere, for a list of every employee with access to the exact radar system Tolkachev had just leaked.
Tolkachev does not wait to find out if he is the target.
The next morning, he calls in sick, drives out of Moscow alone, and buries every piece of equipment he owns.
Cameras, code pads, stacks of Soviet cash in a hole in the forest floor.
It was a false alarm, but it forced him to confront something he had been avoiding. What happens if the KGB ever does catch him? So he asked his handlers for something almost no spy ever requires out loud.
A way out. A concealed suicide pill hidden inside an ordinary fountain pen, so that if he was ever caught, he would not be taken alive, and he would not be tortured into giving up the people who trusted him. His handlers worried about him constantly.
He brushed off the danger every time.
When one CIA case officer admitted he was afraid for him, Tolkachev answered with a sentence that would later become the epigraph of his entire story.
Everything we do is dangerous. He had become something almost mythical inside the CIA. Calm under pressure, methodical, fearless.
21 secrets meetings deep into the Moscow's most heavily watched streets, and the KGB still had no idea he existed. He had outsmarted the most feared intelligence service on the planet for 6 straight years.
What finally destroyed him wasn't a mistake he made.
It was a man he never, ever met.
Edward Lee Howard was supposed to be the next CIA officer sent to Moscow to personally run Tolkachev. He had trained for it for over a year. Surveillance, evasion, secret communication. The same jack-in-the-box trick used in the opening scene.
Then, weeks before he was set to leave, Howard failed a lie detector test.
Then a second one, then a third. The CIA decided they could not trust him with their most sensitive operation on Earth. They fired him and threw him out with no explanation. Howard was furious, humiliated.
He showed up uninvited at the home of a former CIA supervisor.
Drunk, shouting, demanding they reverse a decision, but they couldn't. The damage to his career was done.
So Howard decided to even the score.
He walked into the Soviet consulate in Washington, D.C.
and left a note for the KGB offering to say what he knew for $60,000. He had spent over a year reading the CIA's most classified cables about the Moscow station.
He knew or could easily guess exactly who Tolkachev was.
For months, nothing happened.
Then, in the late autumn in 1982, the CIA's officers in Moscow began to notice something wrong. Scheduled meetings with Tolkachev were missed. Calls of his apartment went unanswered or were picked up by someone else entirely.
It would take years before the full truth surfaced.
But on a busy Sunday evening in June 1985,
Tolkachev and his wife were driving home from their country house when a traffic policeman waved them over on a quiet forest road.
It was not a traffic stop. The moment he stepped out of the car, several men rushed him from behind, forced a cloth into his mouth, and dragged him into the unmarked van. 6 years, 21 meetings, nearly $2 billion in stolen secrets. It ended on a wet road in the rain.
Tolkachev was taken to Lefetovo, the KGB's most feared prison. He confessed the spying, but never once gave up the fact that his wife had known at his trial. A military tribunal sentenced him to death for treason.
He stood perfectly straight as the verdict was read, and gave his name without a trace of fear in his voice. On October 22, 1986, the Soviet news agency announced that Adolf Tolkachev had been executed for high treason.
His wife Natalia was sentenced to 3 years in labor camp for allegedly knowing about his espionage.
She was released in 1987, broken but unbowed,
and died of cancer in 1991. Just months before the Soviet Union she and her husband had both despised finally collapsed. But the intelligence Tolkachev gave the word did not die with him. In 1991, in the skies over Iraq, American F-15 fighter jets built using the very radar secrets he stole shut down Soviet-made MiG fighters with terrifying precision.
The pilots flying those American jets owed a debt they would never know they had to a Moscow engineer who had been dead for 5 years. In 2014, almost 3 decades after his execution, the CIA quietly hung a portrait of Adolf Tolkachev on the wall of its headquarters, alongside the agency's other most legendary operations. In the painting, he sits in the apartment photographing a secret document by lamplight. The artist gave him, in her words, fierce determination, intense concentration, and a trace of fear. He was not a soldier. He was not a spy master. He was an engineer who lost his wife's family to a system built on lies and decided alone, with no training and no certainty. He would survive and spend his back one photograph at a time.
He never saw the Cold War, and he never knew how much his courage actually changed. But somewhere in the design of every fighter jet that outflew a MiG, in every radar signal that found what it was looking for, Adolf Tolkachev is still there.